Welcome to the Emerging Scholar Podcast, Season 1. We hope you enjoy this series of great conversations with leading medical researchers that's designed for graduate students, medical trainees, residents, and fellows to help you on your journey towards your first scientific project. Welcome, everyone, to episode 12 of the Emerging Scholar Podcast. We are back on the topic of qualitative methods with one of Canada's leaders in this field, Dr. Maria Mayan, who's the Associate Director of Community University Partnership and a professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Alberta. Our first conversation took a number of different angles, and we didn't necessarily cover all the things in terms of methodological approaches and the different ways that we can integrate the different qualitative approaches into a health research question. So this second episode is focusing more on what are some of the other considerations that you should be thinking about as you launch a qualitative research project. Dr. Mayan is an outstanding educator and explains things in just a wonderful way. Hopefully this will inspire you to start your own journey in qualitative research. All right, welcome back. We are going into part 2 of our interview with Dr. Maria Mayan from the School of Public Health at the University of Alberta. And we're here to talk about qualitative methods. Welcome back, Dr. Mayan. How are you?
I'm well.
In our first part, we talked about the different methodological approaches. We talked about developing a theory and trying to follow along within the theory that you chose. And I think we ended on how do you recruit participants? The data collection piece in qualitative methods is very different from the quantitative piece. And so from a data collection standpoint, I'm familiar with, I guess, the two most simple groupings, which would be interviews versus focus groups. But can you maybe give us all a little bit of an overview of what kind of methods are available to us?
Yeah, I think that's mostly started interviews and focus groups, and those are great methods to use. Focus groups, people, I think, kind of go into them maybe a bit naively. They are very difficult to plan for, manage. You should have at least 3 people in the room. If you're going to do a focus group, have your person that sits off to the side and takes notes and makes sure, especially if you're not videoing it, she or he or they mark who's speaking in what order so that you can transcribe it, and then have the main person answering the questions and then another person, middle person, to be thinking through the answers. Because when you're facilitating it, you're in the moment, you're just trying to get the conversation going. That kind of middle person can make the connections behind the scene and then go, maybe you should take this question, or maybe you should ask this approach. Or so you kind of need 3 people in the room to do a focus group. And a focus group's great if you want to understand how people negotiate things, how things arise from a group discussion. If you want to kind of go, oh, somebody said this, and then somebody goes, yeah, that was my experience, or I didn't experience that, and this is why. And so you want to hear how people come to kind of shared meaning or not in that discussion. So it's good if you kind of want to go how different groups of people understand things. So you could have a patient group, and then you could have a nurse group, and then ask the same question and see how meanings are negotiated and figured out in those different groups. And then you can kind of compare contrast. Or if you don't think it's too contentious, you could have nurses and patients in the group together and then hear how they negotiate. It's good for those kinds of approaches. And I guess I'm pretty flexible when it comes to a lot of things, but when it comes to focus groups, I think that literature has been watered down. And so I think a lot of people claim a focus group when they're doing a group interview. So a group interview is just get some people together, ask them some questions. And when you analyze it, you'll go, person A said this, person B said this, person C said this, here's the theme. A focus group discussion is that interaction. You have to pay attention to that interaction. So how that meaning is created. And so you have to pay attention, and you have to write about when this person said this, this person agreed, and that's how that meaning was created. So it really is paying attention to those connections among the participants in the focus group. And so if you're doing just a group interview, and that's just wonderful and fine, just call it a group interview. If you're calling it a focus group discussion, then you're going to have to pay attention to the interactions among people. So yeah, and so focus groups can be a lot of fun, but they can be really kind of harrowing experiences. If it's a topic you're not really familiar with, or you think there's going to be a lot of controversy, or Yeah, they take a lot of skill, I would say, to keep on track. We did one once with parents who had an infant die in the NICU, and that was an exhausting. The parents were comforting myself and a colleague after and saying, "Do you need a hug?" Because it was such a. I think we were probably out of our depth, actually, and probably weren't as well prepared for that conversation as what we should have been. But it was a focus group discussion, how parents had that experience and their recommendations for making that a little bit, if possible, a better experience for parents. So if you're not going to do a focus group, or one-on-one interviews are great, but we've really grown into arts-based methods.
Can I just go back? Why did you choose a focus group for that question?
Because we thought there would be some kind of, we wanted recommendations. We wanted to make the experience better again, if possible. And we thought the focus group would help generate new ideas. Like I might just as a parent, I'd go, "Oh, no, it was fine. I think it's okay. Our experience was okay. I don't think you really can change something." But in a focus group, a parent might go, "Oh, it would have been really helpful if," and then you go, "Yeah." And then maybe that generative kind of like, oh, and then at the end, you kind of go, "Oh, actually, there's some really good stuff here that I never would have thought about if somebody was just staring at me across a coffee table saying, how could we improve your experience?"
So in this case, this would be something that individual families experienced individually. But when you bring them together, they might highlight things that they had a shared experience with. And that information could only come out with a focus group.
You got it.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So when would you
synthesis.
When would you choose an interview versus a focus?
Yeah, I guess just when you want to really try and understand the meaning behind an individual's behavior. I mean, you have that interview. I guess it's not when a focus group doesn't apply, but when it really is that one-on-one, if trying to get that meaning behind the behavior, or kind of, well, how does this make sense to you? And have that. You can still have a generative discussion, but it really is just having that person describe their experience and the meaning they attach to it.
Maybe they might not feel comfortable in that space with other people talking about it, that kind of thing. Okay.
You bet. And then sometimes it surprises you. Like for the focus group, it does surprise you sometimes, and the topics that you can carry off in a focus group, that you would think, that you would assume people wouldn't feel comfortable talking about, but that actually might work. So it's good to always check with people with expertise in the area, right? Before you make that decision, what they would decide. But yeah, for sure, if you're not comfortable in a focus group, an interview is great.
And the other question I had in that regard is, and you kind of touched on it in your first response, is that you could have different people within that experience in the healthcare setting. So thinking about pediatrics, you could have the teenager, maybe living with a chronic condition. For sure, mom and dad have something to say as a third perspective, and then a healthcare provider. What is that? How do I fit that into the qualitative methodological framework?
I don't think I would throw those three groups of people in the same
right.
And not in the same room, especially as the teenager rolls their eyes at the parents. But in some circumstances, maybe you could. I'm not sure. I think that would be your call as professionals in that area of, would this topic be okay? Or just have a focus group with youth, have a focus group with parents, have a focus group with healthcare providers. Same question. 3 different perspectives and 3 different groups. And you'll still get variety and variability in each group, right? And that's kind of the magic too of focus groups.
Is that recommended that you try to triangulate experiences from different groups?
Yep, that is exactly data triangulation that you're getting at, John. Yeah.
Okay. I work with a lot of shy teenagers. And I asked you to think about, we've used photos or arts-based work, like photo voice as a methodology. And then I've heard people say, "Oh, no, John, you're doing photo elicitation."
Oh, yes.
I don't know the difference, but can you explain, why are we bringing that in? What are the advantages?
Yeah.
And then what's the difference between an elicitation and a method?
Yeah. So elicitation is, again, you'll find the literature not 100% clear on this, but you could take in, so an elicitation, it is so good with teenagers, with individuals who aren't comfortable in your first language, if assuming English. So people can use photos, either photo voice, photo elicitation, to just make the interaction a little more comfortable. People who have a hard time, even if English is their first language, articulating the experience, or the experience is hard to articulate as well. Elicitation is, you could take photos, and I had a student do this once, and she was interviewing young fathers. So young men who became fathers as teenagers. She had her first few interviews, terrible, could not get them to talk. It was just, what are we going to do here? I have no data. And she ended up, this one was a photo voice, but she ended up sitting side by side instead of across the table from them. You could, she did photo voice, which I'll get to in a second, but an elicitation is when the researcher takes photos. So goes around and takes photos of a particular setting, or in this case, she could have done, what she thought might spur the conversation, a playground, a grocery, a school, or whatever, and say, put the photo down in front of the young father and say, tell me what it's like to be a father. Tell me what this experience is like for you. And then you could put a playground down and, what do you guys do for fun? You could manage conversation that way. The photo voice is when actually the young father, you would say, go take your phone, your camera or whatever, and go take what it's like to be a father. Go take photos of what it's like to be a father. And then they come to you with their photos and then they show you. And what's great about both approaches is that the participant has control over the interview. They can decide what to show you, what not to show you, what to speak to, what not to speak to, what to skip, how much depth they'll go into. And so when it's a really hard to talk about phenomenon, hard to wrap words around, English as a second language, somebody who just really doesn't want to open up or whatever, those photos open the door to a conversation. So in that case, with the young men, I would say, let them go take some photos and then say, what's going on in this photo for you? Tell me about this. We did an elicitation once, so we took the photos, but it was a very contained setting. It was in a elder care center where we were trying to make the elder care center more home-like. And so in this setting, we took a picture of the dining room, of the hallways, of individuals' rooms, their own rooms, the family areas. So we put those in front of spouses of individuals who were living in the elder care center and said, tell us about the dining hall. How would you make that more like home? How would you? So the elicitation worked in that setting because it truly was a bounded setting where it was what they were familiar with. So the elicitation is generally understood as, or photo interviewing, sometimes you'll hear referred to as the researcher takes the photo in to prompt the discussion. Photo voice is when the participant takes their own photos, but both really good for opening up conversation. And you can use other arts-based methods to open up conversation, like collage, right? You could get people to say, grab some images from a magazine or newspaper of hard images, if people still work with those, or just on the internet, and tell me why you chose that image. Tell me why you placed it there, and why did you put that one in the center of your board, or those kinds of things. So there's lots of arts-based that are great for not only just opening up data collection for interviewing, but they can be your end product as well for out of a qualitative. You can have a gallery of collage. You can have a gallery of the photos that the young men took. The arts space can kind of go as a data collection process, but also as your final product.
Yeah, I've seen it even used as a knowledge translation tool.
You betcha.
Really powerful.
Really powerful. Yeah. And if the whole point of research is to have people appreciate a phenomenon or understand it differently or change behavior, if that's the whole point of what we're doing in research, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, we want to learn something from it and hopefully change behavior as a result, then what better way if you have an arts-based, if you have something that evokes something in somebody, right? If you like report, yes, they're important, but if really, really deep down, our expectation is what we demand of ourselves is to make the world a better place. It's not through manuscripts.
Right. So that image or that artwork can be very powerful.
Yeah.
So thinking about some of my experiences in the recent past, people have always asked me, so who are you going to get to do the interview? Right. And I've listened to some great interviewers. I can't imagine, as I'm a dad, right? So I can't imagine a grad student coming in with a bunch of dads who are just super nervous about talking about childcare or whatever, and they're just closed down. And then all of a sudden the grad student sits beside me at a table and I'm like, hey, what are we doing here?
Totally.
It is a personality. I think you need a certain type of personality, a certain type of training, and a certain type of person I think is drawn to this kind of work. So as a resident is coming into this work, what kind of training do you think they should be having, or what kind of skills do they need to develop before they can do a good job? I'm not going to send a grad student in to run an MRI to take a an image of the heart and they don't know anything, right? Why would I think I could send a grad student in to do qualitative interviewing? Just what kind of things should we do to prepare our trainees?
Well, there's lots of, boring sections of textbooks that tell you how to prepare for an interview, right? And there's lots of that kind of like build rapport, start with really easy questions, and then you can get into the deeper questions. There's tons and tons of stuff on that. And it makes sense. It makes very good sense. You'll read it and it makes very good sense. And you should read that, like read those kinds of things, generally how an interview goes, and right through to the wrap up. Is there anything else you'd like to tell me? Those kinds of things. Again, you learn from your mistakes. We were once interviewing individuals who cared for a dying spouse, parent, and they were videotaped interviews because we were also looking at how facial expressions change to look at cues of how people might be going into more suffering and enduring kinds of emotions. Anyway, that's another topic. We formally wrapped up those interviews and said, thank you very much. This is great, wonderful. Be on your way now. We phoned the next day, said, how are you doing? And the individual said, I shouldn't have driven home. You shouldn't have let me go at that time. I was in a cloud. I, had a really bad night. And so we learned from, quite a highly sensitive discussion that we made after that we would have a cup of tea. We went into a different room. We started talking about any other topic other than what we were just talking about. And so kind of thinking about those things instead of here's how to conduct an interview, but what do you need to maybe do beforehand? What do you need to do after? And have that cup of tea, check in that night, check in that next day, again, depending on kind of the sensitivity of the topic. I think really being just a decent human being really helps. Understanding, I don't know if it would be emotional intelligence, but letting the participant lead and taking the cues and not, if somebody it says something like, oh, that was the worst night of my life, and you jump to question number 3, because that's the next one on your list. Yeah. And it has nothing to do with how they just ended question number 2. Having a genuine conversation with somebody, being prepared, not having to look at your interview questions and asking them robotically, but knowing what you want to ask, but allowing that person to lead the conversation and tell you what they think is important about the experience or the phenomenon. Just being able to be attentive and truly hearing what that person is saying again, instead of, and people will feel nervous, and your first couple of interviews as you go along will be, you'll go, oh my God, I can't believe I just said that. And when you look at your transcript, you'll go, oh, I cannot believe I interrupted. I cannot believe I followed up with that question. Was that ever insensitive or, ridiculous or whatever? Yeah, I think it's just having a true, genuine motivation to learn from people and hear truly what they have to say about that experience.
Yeah, genuinely curious about the individual and the topic and the experience, that kind of thing. Yeah. With this growth in patient-oriented research, we explored a joint interview where we had a patient partner. So someone who'd lived with type 1 diabetes for a long time, work with the graduate student because the graduate student didn't live with type 1. And one of the things I think that emerges from that is with your own lived experience, you can ask deeper questions.
Yes.
And maybe that curiosity is more genuine. Do we encourage graduate students to do deeper dives or have a better understanding of the lived experience of the group they're working with so that they can ask more genuine questions?
Yeah, I think so. And preparing as much as you can. I can tell you, after we did that focus group with the parents whose infant died in the NICU, did we ever read the literature in a different way? We read the literature in a different way on interviewing on sensitive topics to, again, appreciate a little bit more about that. But yeah, I think so. And I think graduate students or anybody really does research on something that's meaningful to them, right? And so you will have a graduate student who's interested in diabetes because they've lived with diabetes, or abuse, right? Domestic abuse because they grew up in a home with domestic abuse. So I think it can be a real strength going into interviews or data collection if you've done the hard work of understanding your own experience before you do that.
So now let's assume you've collected some data. Another false belief, I think, that most people who haven't done qualitative interviews but have maybe done some quantitative work is you buy the NVivo software just like you would buy SAS or SPSS,
Yeah,
download
yeah.
R, and you just put the transcripts in there, and then they just fire out all your themes.
Dang.
And it's not the case.
It's not the case.
So
It's so
how do you turn
hard.
all of that into data or into results? But also you talked about something important that I don't know if we've considered is you talked about facial expressions, right? Or in a focus group, there's a dynamic that happens in the room that this third person's grabbing that does not come out on a transcript. So how does this get collected? And then how do you turn it into a product that helps us understand and experience a little more deeply?
Yeah, it's so funny because again, we'll say, I guarantee if you go just Google your first focus group paper right now, go to Google Scholar and look up focus group. It'll say we used focus groups and the rationale is because we wanted to observe nonverbal behavior. And there'll be nothing in the manuscript about the nonverbal behavior. So if you're going to say this is really important for this reason, you're going to have to say somebody attempted a joke and this person did not find it funny. And that kind of like that, it's an interpretation, of course. But when somebody kind of scowled or turned up their nose or their face or whatever, when that person attempted a joke. So that's the stuff they pay attention to, right? So again, if you're going to say, I really want to pay attention to nonverbal behavior, make sure you're reporting on it. But there's different ways to analyze your data, whether it's focus group or interview or collage, or if that's your data. Everybody says theming, and that's okay. And you can theme. Theming is, and again, it's a mess in the literature, but theming, it really is kind of not going line by line and highlighting. Like if you can imagine reading a textbook or reading a manuscript or reading something, and you've got a highlighter in your hand, for some reason, there's something telling you, I better highlight those 3 words or those 4 words or that phrase. So theming, I will get back to that, I promise. So theming is kind of reading and going, what's going on here? What are people saying? What's the meaning here? It's quite a not super high level take, but it is kind of what is going on? What is going on? So when you theme, you code at that kind of what is going on here level. Qualitative content analysis is different than theming. So we talk about in qualitative content analysis, people think about counting words. So I'm not talking about counting words. I'm talking about building categories. So you build a category, which is that you might code one word or one phrase, that highlighter where you're going, I'm reading this transcript by this young father, and he says, this program is really dumb. I might highlight program is really dumb. And then he goes on and says, yeah, it's useless. So I might highlight it's useless. And so then I might build a category about the program that he's in as being a young father, something about it being dumb and useless from his perspective. So you build that category. Whereas theming, you kind of go, okay, what is going on here? What is he experiencing? And it's at a higher level. So you build categories in a qualitative content analysis. In a qualitative content analysis, you also have like maybe you've built 3 categories, 4 categories, 5 categories, and then you try and find a theme or 2 that weaves through those categories. And you go, okay, what kind of holds all of this together? And that what kind of holds all of these categories together is generally the answer to your research question, or generally when you meet somebody in the elevator and they go, well, what did you find in your master's thesis? And you go, that young fathers are frustrated with the services that they have to go to. So you might have a whole bunch of different categories, but generally it's like, okay, overall, what weaves these together is this overall theme. So that's qualitative content analysis. And I would argue a lot of our research takes that approach.
Mm-hmm. And
theming is that. Go ahead, John.
Like just as you said that, I was like, oh my God, everyone just describes their themes and then they don't pull them together. And everyone, I mean, I've done that too.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah.
That's so
yeah,
great.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
You just code, you just write the themes and say, there you go, you interpret it yourself kind of thing.
You betcha. You betcha. Exactly.
Like yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So then what would be the next level?
So another approach you can take, so not necessarily a different level, but a different approach, is one called constant comparison. You'll often hear that associated with grounded theory, but it can be used with your data. And in constant comparison, you kind of go, you can compare anything. You can compare, say you have 4 transcripts in front of you. okay, when this event for this person compared the same event for this person, okay, when I was diagnosed. So you go, what happened when I was diagnosed in person A? What happened when I was diagnosed in person B? What happened when I was diagnosed in person C? And then in D. So you go, okay, let's compare responses. How did people compare the response? Or you can compare within a transcript, you can compare experiences within it when they contradict each other. So you can kind of take any kind of unit or any kind of thing that is comparable and compare them within transcripts, across transcripts, to come up with results that way. So you can see where it lends itself to theory, because if you're kind of going, this event leads to this, which leads to this, which is kind of a phased approach, or you can see how things link, it works for building theory. But again, it can be used with any qualitative data if that makes sense for you to kind of compare across different data sets.
Even like different individuals, like that case we had before where you have a child, you have a caregiver, and then you have a healthcare provider, you could compare.
You betcha.
Similarity or discontinuity or whatever.
And so you would say I took a constant comparative approach to my analysis.
And one more?
One more. And this, again, doesn't really apply too much. This is more for the theoretical disciplines like a sociology, but they will take a Foucauldian or Deleuzian or Bourdieu, and they'll go, okay, the concept of this theory of Bourdieu's habitus, I really like that concept. And then they'll read or they'll think with the transcripts with that theory. So not a theory on parenting, like not a substantive theory, but more of a theoretical orientation or approach. So queer theory, and how does, when you're reading these transcripts, what does queer theory bring out in those transcripts for you? If I'm reading this with a queer theory in my head, how does queer theory help illuminate some of the experiences they have? So that would be a very different approach, again, to analysis. So you kind of pick one, give it a try. And then as you go along, you memo, you can do things like diagram, or a student of mine used a Buddha board where she constantly was kind of creating image to help her. She kept drawing a hook. She was a physiotherapist and kept drawing a hook. This hook helped her understand how her patients felt in the physiotherapy interaction. So you can do a whole bunch of supportive strategies to help advance your thinking as well when you analyze data.
And then thinking about grounded theory, so then you'd have your themes, right? You'd have maybe your overarching concepts. And then how do you then take that and create your own theoretical framework at the end? Or is that something that you don't necessarily do? Or sorry, how does it turn into grounded theory? Or what's the...
Yeah, I think then you play with how it makes most sense to present, I guess. I don't know if I'm answering your question, John, but it's more of, now I have all of these things, these categories or concepts, or I've developed these, what I think I've kind of nailed down. Now, how do I tell the story with that? How does it make the most sense to present this so that people will go, aha, that captures my experience. Aha, I see myself in that. Aha, that is helpful for me to understand how I need to change or how this experience is for somebody.
That brings up another question that I've thought about as well when we talk about rigor, methodological rigor, or validity. I don't know if that's the right term, but what are some of our strategies now that you've kind of created that theory or you have your results, and how do you go to the next level to convince the reader that, this is close to the truth?
Yeah. I love rigor, but I think I really love it because I remember being a grad student and doing a totally qualitative dissertation in 1995 and just being terrified in my defense of, they're going to ask me about generalizability, they're going to ask me about validity, and I didn't know what to say. Like, I really didn't. Like, I did. I had Guba and Lincoln's writing from 85, thank goodness. But really, it was a very, very terrifying concept to talk about. And we've evolved. The literature's really evolved in that area, thank goodness. And I do talk about generalizability, reliability, and validity because I'm in a health field and I feel very comfortable talking about it. We just talk about those concepts as, so validity understood in a quantitative frame, but then we can talk about validity as understood, defined through a qualitative lens or defined qualitatively. So meaning we didn't just cook this stuff up in our heads and present it. There are strategies. So this work is valid because we put these strategies into place. So your rigor strategies. You can do a lot during the inquiry. Actually, I think that's where, it's not post hoc. It's during the inquiry what you do to make sure your work is rigorous. And so you can do participant checks, member checks with your participants as you go along. Did I get this right? Am I hearing you correctly? You can share your evolving categories with them, your evolving work with them, and say, am I right? And then usually you get, maybe not, you get a little bit more data to clarify. Some people argue that you should give the transcript back to the participant. I generally don't offer that, but some people do. Well, and we talk about kind of investigative responsiveness to make it really valid work, kind of your sensitivity and skill as a qualitative researcher to adapt as things go. If something isn't working, change it. So if your interview guide isn't working, don't just keep asking the same questions because you need to adapt. You might be asking the wrong research question. You might have to adapt your research question. You might have to adapt who you're actually speaking with. Maybe you really wanted to interview the managers of the unit in the hospital and they're giving you the political line. So you're going to have to talk to the nurses that you think you'll get more genuine response. So you kind of go along and you got to be flexible to know if something's not working. You're not going to get good data. You're not going to be able to actually say anything about your research question if you keep on a path that's not getting you an explanation of the phenomenon you're interested in. So being in the field long enough time is another way. So you can't just go, oh, what's the experience of parents who've had an infant die in the NICU and go in and do one focus group and say, got it. No, you got to collect enough data, actually make sure your things are repeating in the data and your categories and what you're saying is sound. There's an article, the first author's Morse, Morse, and it was written a long time ago, and it's called Verification Strategies in Qualitative. I'm on that paper. It was years ago. It was the most painful thing for me ever to write because she was so far ahead in her thinking than what I was at the time. But it is a very, very helpful paper. And it's a quick read that I still, to this day, refer to that paper for verification and in rigor.
Okay. We'll put that in there. You just triggered another thought that every paper I've ever read and every presentation I've ever seen talks about saturation of their data as one aspect of their validity or their rigor, right? So do you want to maybe just touch on that before...
Yeah. Again, it's a really contested term because nothing is ever saturated, right? Like, because you meet an individual and they'll say something because we're all unique and they'll say something that you haven't heard before. There has to be a time where you go, this is my research question. And I think as of today, with the data that I have, I can say something about that. I think I actually have enough that I feel comfortable. I can stand up and say, yes, I believe these 3 or 4 or 5 themes or categories or whatever you're presenting answers this research question to the best of our ability. I think we're close. I think we kind of got it. And then you can say it's saturated. But saturation as it's currently defined is nothing new emerges. You're talking to people, there'll always be something new emerging. But look at your research question and just say, I think I'm okay. I think I got it. I think I can defend this. And then you can say you're ready to wrap it up and say, if you want to say saturation, that's okay if that's important in your discipline. But yeah, saturation is contested.
One thing we did in our last work that was really powerful for me was having a patient advisory committee as part of the research project. And so when we submitted back to them and showed them the themes, and they were able to say, yep, that captures... I agree. That captures my life, or you guys missed this, or that kind of thing. So I think that really helped me as someone not living with type 1 diabetes. The other really powerful presentation paper that I read was about youth that had suffered from trauma. It was about Indigenous youth living in the prairies. And the themes that came out was that specifically around trauma is there, and even trauma from the past was just present. It was always at the top of mind. Yeah. And that influenced how they saw the future, and they just couldn't see a future without trauma. making decisions that would affect their future was difficult because they couldn't really see a future. The investigator said, what we have is disjointed time. For me, listening to that, I was like, oh, you took the themes that were specific themes and I got it. And then you put the overarching theme and now I get it and I can apply that. I can apply both those things in a real world setting. I was like, that is the best. That was some of the best qualitative method I've seen. Now, I don't know, how does that, what was it about that group that said, this is something bigger and broader, right? So the kids didn't identify it themselves, right? But you taking a step back, you could see, this is totally time, right?
Yeah, and that's your take-home message that obviously hits you. Like, what do you need to know at the end of the day? What do you need to know? Yeah, those themes are like good. They provide the meat there, but at the end you go disjointed time. Like anytime now I see these kids, I will remember that's how they go through their everyday, right? And I guess it's that abstracting. Like that's what you do as a qualitative researcher. You abstract up. So you move from these program sucks from the youth, perhaps to disjointed timeline. It's that abstraction as the researcher that you need to do, right? You theorize and you go, okay, you build until you get to that take home message, right? All the meat behind disjointed timeline is there. It's your job as the researcher to get to that place by working with the data, by understanding the literature, what we already understand about this phenomenon, and getting to a point where you go, that's it. That's what I think. That's it.
So is that done in a group? Is that somewhere where you'd say to the trainee, sit down with other qualitative methodological experts and present your data, and then you kind of dialogue about, and maybe some people with lived experience who are part of your study and say, let's go through this and see what we can.
Yeah. And I think, your patient advisory committee, absolutely, your supervisor, or sometimes I had two PhD students that worked as a team over their 5 years of being in school together. And I would join them sometimes because they were both my students, and how they challenged each other with, you're saying this, last time you said this, you've changed your word now. You've changed the way you're talking about that. How did that happen? Why are you changing that? That way you said it last, that a little bit better. Why have you changed that? And you think, well, why did I change that? Like, what was my thought process there? So yes, your patient advisory, your actual patients, your other colleagues, your supervisor, your partner, you throw it out there and then you're open to kind of critique, and you have to really think through why you said what you said or labeled something the way you labeled it.
That's great. So I'm a pediatric resident. I'm thinking I want to understand and experience within pediatrics. I'm drawn towards qualitative methods. I know methodological coherence is really important to me because I've read it from Dr. Mayan, but where do I start? Like what do you recommend for a grad student or a resident coming in and they're going to start their first project? Where should they go?
Find something that you care about, but also that needs exploration. And so listen to what's happening in the world, what's happening in your hospital, what's intriguing to you, but what's relevant and important and urgent in our lives. And then read some more and talk with people and look at different sources, look at the Globe and Mail, look at wherever other sources that are talking about this. And then try and identify what is a little bit of a missing piece in this. What's something that you really want to know that you think will help make life better for people? And if I can answer this little piece of the puzzle, I think it's going to make things just a little bit better. It'll make my practice better. It'll make the experience better. And then start with I've thought about a lot of this. I've read a lot. I've talked to my partner about it. I've talked to John about it. And now try and write it down so that, because sometimes things fall apart when you write them down. You think you know what you're going to do, and then you write it down and you go, oh, this just doesn't make sense anymore. And so try and write your rationale down for doing it. This is happening. We know this, we know that, but we yet don't know this. And so this is where I'm headed, like the funnel, right? The large, usually something starts with the stats, the latest stats on some kind of thing. And you funnel it down to, this is really important to know. So this is where I'm going to insert myself. Do a lot of thinking before you jump in. Do a lot of thinking and reaching out to people and understanding the field. gathering as much information as you can. Even if you go to, the art gallery or a kids concert on the weekend or something, and you see kids art in the hallway of the school, what are they drawing? What's important to those kids? And taking it all in, taking your everyday life, everything that you see, everything you experience can be inspiration, can be data, and then go from there.
Awesome. And then go find an expert like yourself.
Yeah.
or some of your graduate students to work alongside you to make sure you do it right.
That's right. That's right. Oh yeah. Yeah. Get somebody who can really guide you along is also highly recommended.
Oh, that was great. Thank you so much. I learned a ton. It's going to influence, if we do some qualitative methods in the future, influence definitely how we'll do it. I look forward to sharing this with other students. They can reach out to you, I'm sure. Or
you bet.
If they have questions. And then, hopefully we see a lot more pediatric residents diving into qualitative methods in the near future. So
thanks. Pediatric, I think qualitative research I can imagine there'd be a lot of questions you can ask in that setting. Working with kids and youth and parents and healthcare providers, it would be a beautiful setting for qualitative work, no doubt.
Yeah. So thank you very much. We really enjoyed it. Good
Thanks,
luck with
John.
everything. And I'll put a link to all the papers you talked about.
Yes.
Looking forward to
it.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. That was part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Maria Mayan about all aspects of qualitative methods and methodological coherence. Be sure to join us for episode 13, where you as a scholar think about you as a lab mentor. We'll be joined by Dr. Janet Branshaw to discuss best ways for you to bring equity and cultural safety into your own research space to foster a sense of cultural diversity into the research space and into different labs. Thanks for listening. The Emerging Scholar podcast was recorded in the UMFM studios located at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. This is Treaty 1 territory, the original homeland of the Anishinaabe, the Innu, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Manitoba is also homeland to the Anishinaabe, the Dakota Ayote, and the Dene peoples. We acknowledge that our water is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. As a settler scientist working in health research, I acknowledge TRC Call to Action number 18, that health inequities between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people are the direct result of colonization. Winnipeg is the Centre for Reconciliation in Canada, and where we are speaking from today is at the crossroads of Canada's history and Canada's future. We are 3 kilometers away from one of the most sacred meeting grounds for Indigenous people on the plains and within Turtle Island. We are also several kilometers away from one of the last residential schools in the province. We are working collectively on reconciliation with youth, elders, and community leaders to heal from the trauma of colonization, past and present, honor the original treaties, and create a Canada that addresses and eliminates the inequities and injustices of the past and present to create a future for Indigenous children to live and thrive. On behalf of the team at the Emerging Scholar podcast, we want to thank Osani Balkaran for the great production for our opening and closing themes. We also want to thank UMFM 101.5, especially co-producer Jared Makitiak for technical assistance and production on this project. We also want to thank all of our guests for the discussion and the insight that they've provided. Once again, thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the Emerging Scholar podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and umfm.com.